3 years ago, my ex-husband tossed his wedding ring onto the counter and laughed at my plans to restore this crumbling mansion, calling it a money pit before leaving me for an heiress. He thought he had hit the jackpot, but tonight, watching him freeze outside the gates of my $2.5 million estate with a court summons in his hand, realizing he is penniless, that look on his face is worth more than the deed itself. My name is Harper, and at 34 years old, I was technically a successful architect specializing in historical restoration. However, you would not know it by looking at me. I was sitting on a rickety stool in the kitchen of the Sterling estate, a crumbling Victorian mansion in a forgotten corner of Chicago. The room smelled of wet plaster, mildew, and the distinct dusty scent of a dream that was rapidly turning into a nightmare. I had paint in my hair and drywall dust coating my eyelashes. This house was my masterpiece in the making, but to the rest of the world, including the man currently walking through the front door, it was just a rotting pile of lumber. Caleb, my husband of 6 years, strode into the room. At 36, he was the picture of corporate vanity, a sales director at Summit and Peak, a real estate firm that prioritized flashover foundation. He was wearing his Italian wool coat, careful not to let the hem touch the dusty floorboards. He did not say hello. He did not ask about my day. He simply looked at the exposed beams and the peeling wallpaper with a sneer that curled his lip upward. "I am done. Harper," he announced, his voice flat and cold. "I want a divorce." I froze, the mug of lukewarm coffee halfway to my mouth. The wind rattled the loose window pane behind me, emphasizing the silence that followed. "What are you talking about?" "We just closed on the house. We have plans." "We have a life." Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a sharp, barking sound. "You have plans. I have a reality check. I am not living in a construction zone. Harper, I am not spending my prime years breathing in asbestos because you have some romantic notion about saving old junk. And besides, I met someone else. The air left my lungs. Someone else, Bianca," he said, the name rolling off his tongue with a reverence he used to reserve for his quarterly bonuses. "She is a hotel heiress. She understands the lifestyle I deserve. She is on a completely different level than you." He gestured vaguely at my oversized flannel shirt and stained jeans. "Look at you. You look like a laborer. Bianca wears silk. She smells like Chanel, not sawdust. I am an architect, Caleb. I build things. That involves getting dirty," I argued, standing up. My hands were shaking. "And you used our joint savings to help put the down payment on this place. This is our investment." "That is where you are wrong," he snapped, pulling a crisp legal folder from his briefcase. He tossed it onto the dirty table between us. "You used the savings. I just watched you throw money into a hole in the ground. I am not going to be saddled with the debt of this money pit. This place is a disaster waiting to happen." He opened the folder and pointed to a document. It was a quitclaim deed. "Sign it," he commanded. "You sign over full ownership to yourself. You take the house. You take the mortgage. You take all the financial liability. In exchange, I will not fight you for the furniture or the car. I want my name off this title. Harper. I want a clean slate." I looked at the paper. If I signed it, I would be solely responsible for a mortgage I could barely afford on a single income, for a house that needed hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs. You can't be serious," I stammered, feeling the tears prick my eyes. "You are abandoning me with all of this because you found some rich girl I am cutting the dead weight," he said, leaning in, his eyes hard. "If you don't sign, I will drag this out in court. I will force a sale. I will make sure this place gets auctioned off for pennies. And you will walk away with absolutely nothing, at least this way. You get to keep your pile of bricks." My hand trembled as I reached for the pen. Logic told me I was signing my own death warrant, financially speaking, but my heart, broken and bleeding, told me this house was the only thing I had left. I would not let him take it from me. I scrawled my signature on the line, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper. Caleb snatched the document back the second I lifted the pen. He checked the signature, a satisfied smirk appearing on his face. He picked up his briefcase, already packed. "Smart choice," he said. He looked at me one last time, his gaze sweeping over me with utter contempt. "You know, looking at you now, I realized something. You were just a bad investment. Harper. Volatile. High maintenance. No return. But Bianca, she is a blue-chip stock. Stable. High value. I am just rebalancing my portfolio. Get out," I whispered, my voice failing me. Gladly. He turned on his heel and walked out. I heard the heavy front door slam, followed by the roar of his luxury sedan, the one my salary had helped pay for speeding away. I was left standing in the center of the vast, hollow kitchen. The heating system was broken, and the Chicago winter was seeping through the cracks in the walls. It was 10 degrees below zero outside, but the cold I felt inside my chest was far worse. I was alone in a mansion that was falling apart, holding on to a dream that everyone else thought was garbage. The first month after Caleb left was not lived, it was endured. I slept on a twin mattress dragged into the center of the unfinished parlor, wrapped in 3 layers of wool blankets because the heating system was still just a hopeful diagram on my drafting table. Every morning, I woke up coughing up fine white drywall dust, my muscles screaming from the physical labor of gutting a 4,000-square-foot mansion alone. The silence of the house was heavy, broken only by the settling of the foundation and the wind whistling through the gaps in the window frames. In that silence, the ghosts of my 6-year marriage haunted me. I remembered the nights I stayed up until 3 in the morning fixing his spreadsheets for Summit and Peak because he was not a details guy. I remembered the times I quietly covered the mortgage from my personal savings when his commission checks were mysteriously delayed, only for him to come home with a new watch a week later. He had called himself a visionary, a man of big ideas. I realized now that I was just the financier of his delusions, the safety net he never acknowledged until he decided to cut the ropes. The betrayal hit its peak on a Tuesday night when I finally summoned the courage to audit my finances. I logged into my retirement account, expecting to see the modest but steady growth of my nest egg. Instead, I saw a crater. A withdrawal of $15,000 had been made exactly 3 days before he asked for a divorce. No, this cannot be right, I stammered, staring at the screen, my finger trembling on the mouse. I called the bank immediately, my voice shaking with a mix of panic and rage. When the representative confirmed the transfer was authorized by Mr. Caleb Sullivan for a jewelry store transaction, I dropped the phone. He had stolen my future to buy an engagement gift for his new one. You absolute thief, I screamed into the empty, echoing hallway, tears finally spilling over. That was for us. That was for when we got old, but I did not let the tears drown me. I let them boil. I grabbed a sledgehammer from my tool belt. If Caleb thought I was a bad investment, I was going to show him exactly what kind of return I could generate. I attacked the ugly, water-damaged plaster walls of the dining room with a ferocity that felt less like renovation and more like exorcism. As a large chunk of lath and plaster crashed to the floor, something caught the light of my work lamp. I paused, wiping sweat from my forehead. Underneath layers of cheap renovation from the 1970s, I saw the glint of dark wood. I carefully pried away the remaining debris. My breath caught in my throat. Oh my God. Look at you, I whispered, running my fingers over the surface. It was hand-carved mahogany paneling, perfectly preserved, featuring intricate floral motifs that had been fashionable in the late 19th century. This was not just a house, it was a treasure chest that had been sealed shut. The value of the property just jumped by at least 20% in my mind. My obsession spilled over into my day job at Archivisions. My colleagues began to look at me with a mixture of awe and concern. I was the first one in and the last one out, fueling myself on black coffee and spite. Harper, seriously, you have been here for 18 hours. David, a senior partner, said one evening, leaning against my doorframe. You look like you are running on fumes. Go home. I can't. Not yet, I replied, my eyes glued to the rendering of the conservatory I was designing. If I stop, I think I might fall apart. Just let me work. David, when I was not working, I was watching. It was a masochistic ritual. I sat on my mattress in the dust and scrolled through their social media feeds. There was Caleb, tanning on the deck of a yacht in Cabo. There was Bianca, pouting for the camera in a dress that cost more than my car. They looked perfect, untouchable. But then, I saw it. A crack in the veneer. Bianca was doing a live stream from a high-end boutique in Aspen. She was twirling around, showing off a pair of diamond earrings, talking to her followers about treating herself. She walked to the counter to pay, forgetting that the phone was still recording audio clearly. I will take them, Bianca chirped. I heard the beep of the card machine, then a pause. I am sorry, miss. The sales clerk's voice cut through the background music. This card was declined. Bianca's face on the screen froze, her smile twitching. That is impossible. Don't be ridiculous. Run it again. I have run it twice. Miss, it says, do not honor. The clerk replied, their tone professional but firm. Bianca ended the live stream abruptly, the screen going black. I sat back against the cold wall of my unfinished house, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Trouble in paradise already, I murmured to the dark room. Let's see how deep the rot goes. I needed a weapon, not just a lawyer, so I hired Renee Sharp. In the tight-knit circle of Cook County Family Court, she was known as the asset shredder, a woman who could smell hidden offshore accounts the way a shark smells blood in the water. Sitting in her glass-walled office, she flipped through the photos of the sterling estate I had brought her. Listened to me very carefully. Harper, Renee said, looking over her rimless glasses. If this house has the potential you say it does, you keep your mouth shut. Absolutely shut. We do not talk about the restoration. We do not talk about the mahogany. To Caleb and his lawyers, this place is a liability. It is a debt trap. Our strategy is simple. We focus on the dissipation of marital assets. I took her advice to heart. That night, I turned my dining room table into a war room. I downloaded every bank statement from the last 2 years and started cross-referencing Caleb's expenses with his calendar. It was tedious work, but anger is a powerful fuel. I found a recurring expense labeled Client Entertainment VIP starting exactly 8 months before he asked for a divorce. The dates perfectly aligned with check-ins on Bianca's social media. A $500 dinner at a steakhouse, a $2,000 weekend suite at the Ritz. He had been funding his courtship with her using the money we were supposed to be saving for a boiler replacement. You liar. I whispered to the empty room, circling another charge with a red marker. You were building a life with her while I was clipping coupons, but I did not stop there. I needed to know who I was up against. I called in a favor from an old contact in title insurance to run a background check on Bianca, the supposed hotel heiress. The report that came back 2 days later was shocking. Bianca did not own a hotel chain. Her distant uncle did, and he had cut her off 3 years ago. She was drowning in credit card debt and had 2 active lawsuits against her for unpaid rent. She wasn't a blue-chip stock. She was a penny stock crashing fast. My phone rang, cutting through my focus. It was Caleb. Harper. His voice boomed through the speaker, dripping with that familiar, unearned arrogance. My lawyer says you are dragging your feet on the final settlement. I want to get this done. Bianca and I are looking at wedding venues in Tuscany, and I need to be free of you. Have you sold that? That pile of rubbish you call a house, yet I took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of pain he had caused me into a performance worthy of an Oscar. Caleb, it is a nightmare, I said, letting my voice crack and tremble. The roof is leaking in 3 places. The foundation repair is going to cost. It is going to cost $40,000. I don't have the money. I am drowning here. I might have to declare bankruptcy if I can't unload it. There was a pause, and then I heard him chuckle. It was a cruel, satisfied sound. I told you so, he gloated. I told you it was a money pit. Look, I will make this easy for you. I will sign a waiver giving up all claim to the property. 0 liability for me. You keep the house, the debt, the headache. I just want my car and my freedom. Send the papers over today, and I will sign. You would really do that, I asked, feigning gratitude. Thank you. Caleb, I really appreciate it. Just get it done. Harper, you are boring me. He hung up. Within 6 hours, the electronic documents were signed, notarized, and filed. Caleb had officially signed away his rights to the Sterling estate to protect himself from a debt that didn't exist, in order to marry a woman whose wealth didn't exist. The very next morning, a thick envelope arrived in the mail from the State Historical Society. I tore it open with shaking hands. We are pleased to inform you, I read aloud, my voice echoing in the grand foyer, that the Sterling estate has been approved for historical landmark status. Enclosed is the reassessment of the property value based on the historical grant eligibility. I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. The value of the house, even in its unfinished state, had just jumped to $1.2 million. Caleb had walked away from a gold mine to chase a mirage, and he had signed his name on the dotted line to do it. Spring finally broke the icy grip of winter in Chicago, and with the thaw came the resurrection of the Sterling estate. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. I spent 3 weeks on my hands and knees, painstakingly stripping layers of grime from the original white oak floorboards until they glowed with a warm, honey-colored hue that had not been seen in 100 years. The living room, once a dark cavern of despair, was now anchored by a Carrara marble fireplace that I had restored to its original, regal white glory, but the crown jewel was the conservatory. I had replaced the broken jagged glass with high-efficiency panes, and now the morning light flooded the space, dancing off the checkerboard tile floor where I had placed potted ferns and fig trees. As the house shed its dusty cocoon, so did I. The oversized flannel shirts and paint-stained jeans were packed away. In their place, I wore tailored blazers and silk blouses that fit the woman I was becoming. I looked in the mirror one morning and did not see the exhausted, discarded wife Caleb had sneered at. I saw a force of nature. I saw a woman who had taken a disaster and turned it into a masterpiece. While I was building my sanctuary, I heard through the grapevine that paradise was starting to crack for my ex-husband. A mutual friend told me that Bianca was becoming increasingly demanding. Apparently, the heiress was accustomed to a certain lifestyle that her frozen trust fund could no longer support, and she expected Caleb to pick up the tab. Caleb. Why is my card being declined again? I imagined her whining, stomping her foot in her designer heels. You said you were a top executive. Fix it. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter one evening. The screen lit up with the name Caleb. I stared at it, a cold smirk playing on my lips. He left a voicemail. Harper. Look, I need to ask you about a tax return from 3 years ago. His voice said, trying to sound casual but failing. We might get audited if we don't. If we don't discuss it. Call me back. And by the way, how are things? You still in that old place? I knew exactly what he was doing. There was no tax audit. He was fishing. He wanted to know if I was miserable. He wanted reassurance that he had made the right choice. I simply pressed the delete button. I did not have time for his games. 2 days later, I received a call that changed the trajectory of everything. It was the editor-in-chief of Modern Living, the most prestigious architectural magazine in the country. We have heard rumors about a significant restoration project in the historic district, she said. We want the exclusive cover story. Before and after? We want to call it The Rebirth of Sterling. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the career break of a lifetime. However, the ink on the divorce papers was not yet dry, and the legal period for contesting the asset division had not fully expired. I would be honored, I replied, keeping my voice steady. But we need to wait until next month to publish. I want everything to be 100% complete. I needed to be legally untouchable before the world saw what I had done. That same week, I had a visitor, Julian, a venture capitalist who had been buying up properties in the neighborhood, stopped by the site. He was different from the men I was used to, quiet, observant, with eyes that seemed to see right through the facade to the structure beneath. "This is extraordinary," Julian said, walking through the conservatory, running a hand along the restored ironwork. "You didn't just fix it, Harper. You saved its soul. It needed someone to believe in it," I said, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was a spark there, warm and genuine. He did not look at me like an accessory or a resource to be drained. He looked at me with respect. "I would love to discuss some other projects with you," he added, handing me his card. "Dinner strictly professional, mostly." I took the card, feeling a flush of excitement I had not felt in years. My life was blooming, vibrant and rich with possibility. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city in a rented condo that smelled of desperation, I knew Caleb was staring at a stack of bills he could not pay, sitting next to a woman who loved his wallet more than him. The contrast was delicious. It was inevitable that our paths would cross indirectly before the final collision. Chicago is a big city, but the circles of the pretentious are incredibly small. I heard from Mark, a mutual friend, that he had run into Caleb at a cocktail bar in the Loop. Mark had tried to hint at my success, telling Caleb that I was doing very well. According to Mark, Caleb had just laughed, swirling his scotch with that dismissive flick of the wrist I used to mistake for confidence. Well, good for her. Caleb had sneered. "I assume that means she finally got the heating working in that mausoleum. I hope she enjoys the draft." He thought doing well meant I was barely surviving. He had no idea that doing well meant I was on the verge of an empire. But his ignorance was about to be shattered, not by me, but by the very lifestyle he had left me to pursue. The facade of his new life began to crack on a Thursday afternoon at the Summit and Peak offices. I was not there, of course, but Jessica, the receptionist who had always liked me better, called me 5 minutes after it happened, breathless with the scandal. A man had walked into the lobby, not a client, but a debt collector. He was loud, aggressive, and looking for Bianca. Jessica mimicked the scene for me. The man had shouted across the sleek, glass-walled lobby, "You tell Mr. Sullivan that his fiancée owes $50,000 in unpaid luxury car leases if she doesn't pay. We are seizing the vehicle." Caleb had come rushing out, face beet red, trying to hush the man, but the damage was done. The entire sales team had heard. The heiress was being chased for debts that a true heiress would clear with pocket change. That night, suspicion must have finally outweighed his infatuation. I can imagine him waiting until Bianca was asleep, her phone buzzing on the nightstand. I can picture him opening her wallet, his hands shaking, pulling out card after card. The Platinum American Express canceled. The black card she flashed at dinners, a novelty prop. The store credit cards maxed out to the limit. He was not marrying a fortune. He was marrying a financial sinkhole. While Caleb was staring into the abyss of his poor decisions, I was holding my liberation in my hands. The courier arrived at the Sterling estate the next morning with a heavy, wax-sealed envelope. It was the final divorce decree. I ran my finger over the embossed seal. It was over. The judge had signed off. Section 4B was the most beautiful poetry I had ever read. The petitioner, Caleb Sullivan, knowingly and voluntarily waives all current and future claims to the property known as the Sterling Estate. He was out. I was the sole owner. I picked up my phone and dialed the editor at Modern Living. "It is done," I said, my voice steady and strong. "Publish it." 24 hours later, the article went live. It was the lead story on their digital platform and the cover of the print edition. The headline was bold, elegant, and impossible to miss Chicago's hidden gem, a $2.5 million rebirth. The photos were spectacular. There was the grand staircase, the hand-carved mahogany I had saved, and the sunlight streaming through the conservatory. And there was me, standing in the center of it all, looking not like a victim, but like a queen in her castle. The article detailed the valuation explicitly, stating that with the historical certification and the restoration, the property was now appraised at $2.5 million. It quoted me talking about the singular vision required to see value where others only saw ruin. Caleb saw it. He had to. He was likely sitting in that overpriced rental apartment that he could no longer afford, surrounded by Bianca's unpaid bills, scrolling through his phone for a distraction. I can only imagine the moment the blood drained from his face. The pile of bricks he had fought so hard to dump on me was now worth more than his entire life's earnings. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. According to Renee, my lawyer, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Caleb did not call me. He called his lawyer, screaming so loud that the receptionist at the law firm could hear him through the handset. She defrauded me. Caleb had reportedly shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. She knew how much it was worth. That house is worth millions. And I got nothing. I want to sue. I want to tear up that agreement. Mr. Sullivan, you signed the waiver. His lawyer had tried to reason. I don't care what I signed, Caleb had yelled, desperation clawing at his throat. She played me, fix it. He was a drowning man realizing that he had poked a hole in his own lifeboat, and I was watching from the shore, dry, warm, and richer than he could ever dream of being. The legal attack arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic about the weight of the paperwork. Caleb's lawyer had filed a motion to vacate the divorce settlement, alleging fraudulent non-disclosure of assets. In plain English, Caleb was claiming I had tricked him into thinking the house was worthless so I could keep the millions for myself. I sat in Renee's office, sipping an espresso while she read the complaint aloud. He claims you. Let me quote this. Maliciously misrepresented the structural integrity and market value of the marital residence to secure an unconscionable advantage. Renee read, raising an eyebrow. I laughed, setting my cup down. Maliciously misrepresented Renee. I have emails where I begged him to look at the inspection report. I have text messages where he called the house a rotting carcass and told me to enjoy my pile of debris. He didn't want the house. He wanted to be rid of the debt. Exactly, Renee said, slamming the folder shut. We have him on record refusing the asset, repeatedly, in writing, but we need a kill shot. Harper. Something that makes him afraid to step into a courtroom. I had just the thing. During my deep dive into our old financial records, I had found something disturbing. It was a loan document for $10,000 from a predatory lender taken out 6 months ago. The borrower was listed as Caleb Sullivan, but the cosigner was Harper Sullivan. I pulled the document from my bag and slid it across the desk. Look at the signature. Renee, look at the H. Renee squinted at it. It loops the wrong way. That is not your handwriting. No, it isn't, I said, my voice cold. He forged my signature to get a loan. I traced the deposit. It went straight into an investment account he opened for Bianca. He committed a felony to impress his girlfriend. Renee's smile was sharp and dangerous. Well then, that changes things from a civil dispute to potential criminal fraud. Let him come. We will be ready. While I was sharpening my legal knives, Caleb's domestic bliss was reportedly turning into a war zone. I heard from mutual acquaintances that the power couple was screaming at each other daily. Bianca had expected a sugar daddy to bail her out of debt. Caleb had expected a sugar mama to fund his lifestyle. Now that they realized both were broke, the romance had evaporated, replaced by panic and blame. "You said you were a top executive?" I imagined Bianca shrieking, "You can't even pay the rent, and you said you were an heiress." Caleb would scream back, "You are just a fraud with a closet full of unpaid handbags." Whatever misery they were in, I was about to make it worse. I decided to host an exclusive open house gala at the Sterling estate. It was ostensibly to reveal the restoration to the market, but really, it was a victory lap. I invited the city's top real estate developers, the mayor, and crucially, the partners from Caleb's old firm. I knew word would get back to him, and it did. Through the grapevine, I learned that Caleb was furious. He was telling anyone who would listen that he was going to show up and expose me. He convinced himself that if he caused a scene in front of the elite, I would be shamed into giving him a share of the money. On the night of the party, I stood in the grand foyer, watching the security team do their final sweep. The head of security, a large man named Marcus, approached me. "Ms. Sullivan, we have a photo of the ex-husband." Marcus said, "If he shows up at the gate, do you want us to remove him immediately?" I smoothed the silk of my midnight blue evening gown and checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. "No, Marcus," I said calmly. "If he comes, you let him in. Do not stop him. Do not touch him. I want him to walk through that front door." Are you sure?" Marcus asked, looking concerned. "He could cause a disturbance. I am counting on it." I replied, "I want him to see it. I want him to see every single inch of what he threw away. Let him come to me." Julian was standing nearby, adjusting his cufflinks. He had heard the exchange. He walked over, his expression serious. "Harper, you don't have to do this," Julian said softly. "I can have my guys handle him. You don't need the drama tonight. This is your moment." I turned to Julian, placing a hand on his arm. I appreciated his protective instinct, but he did not understand. This wasn't just about the house. This was about reclaiming my dignity. "Thank you, Julian," I said. "But he spent 6 years making me feel small. Tonight, I need to be the one standing tall while he falls apart. This is my fight. I need to finish it." Julian looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, stepping back. "Then, give him hell, Harper." Outside, the first limousines were pulling up to the curb. The house was glowing like a beacon in the night, warm and inviting. Somewhere out there in the dark, Caleb was coming to claim what he thought was his. He had no idea he was walking straight into an ambush. The evening of the gala arrived, and the Sterling estate did not just shine, it commanded the night. I had arranged for amber uplighting to wash over the limestone exterior, turning the facade into a glowing beacon against the dark Chicago sky. Inside, the house hummed with the vibration of a string quartet and the polite murmur of 50 of the city's most influential people. The air smelled of expensive perfume, fresh orchids, and the crisp, clean scent of success. I moved through the crowd, a glass of vintage champagne in my hand, wearing a midnight blue velvet gown that draped over my body like liquid armor. Harper. The restoration of the crown molding is simply miraculous, the city's lead historical preservationist told me, gesturing to the ceiling with genuine awe. "You have saved a piece of history. It just needed someone to see past the dust," I replied with a gracious smile, though my heart was pounding a rhythm of pure adrenaline. I felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere near the entrance. It wasn't a noise, but a drop in temperature, a disruption in the flow of the room. I turned and looked toward the massive double doors. Caleb stood there. He looked nothing like the arrogant executive who had sneered at me in our kitchen 3 years ago. His suit, once tailored to perfection, hung loosely on his frame as if he had lost 15 pounds of muscle and replaced it with stress. His collar was unbuttoned, his tie askew, and his eyes were rimmed with the red, gritty look of a man who had not slept in days. He looked frantic, disheveled, and utterly out of place among the polished guests. He took one step into the foyer and stopped dead. I watched as his eyes traveled up the sweeping staircase, across the restored marble floors, and settled on the crystal chandelier that refracted the light into 1,000 rainbows. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He was paralyzed. The money pit he had mocked was now a palace, and the realization hit him like a physical blow to the gut. This cannot be it, I heard him mutter to himself, his voice shaking. This is impossible. Then he saw me. I was standing in the center of the great room, surrounded by admirers, laughing softly at a joke a developer had made. I looked radiant. I looked expensive. I looked happy. I saw the jealousy ignite in his eyes, hot and ugly. His hands balled into fists at his sides, and for a second, I thought he was going to lunge at me, to scream and shatter the elegance of the evening. He took a jagged breath, his chest heaving, preparing to launch a tirade. But then he looked around. He saw the mayor shaking hands near the fireplace. He saw the partners from his old firm looking at him with expressions of pity and distaste. The sheer weight of the house's majesty and my obvious victory crushed him. He shrank back, his aggression wilting into despair. Behind him, lurking in the shadows of the vestibule, was Bianca. She had followed him, unauthorized and uninvited. She was wearing a coat that looked thin and cheap against the backdrop of mink and cashmere in the room. Her eyes were wide, darting from the high ceilings to the artwork on the walls. She looked at Caleb, then at the house, and finally at me. The look on her face was not jealousy. It was the sickening realization that she had bet her future on a man who had thrown away a fortune. "You said she was broke," Bianca hissed at Caleb, her voice a harsh whisper that carried to where I stood. "You said she was nobody." "Shut up, Bianca," Caleb snapped, though his voice lacked any real bite. I didn't know. I did not call for security. I did not run. Instead, I slowly walked up the first few steps of the grand staircase, elevating myself above the crowd. I turned and looked directly at Caleb across the sea of guests. I waited until his bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. I raised my champagne glass in a silent, deliberate toast. My expression was not angry. It was not sad. It was pitying. "Look at what you left." My eyes said, "Look at what you said was worthless." Caleb flinched as if I had thrown the glass at him. He took a stumbling step back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his mistake. He was standing in the doorway of a paradise he had voluntarily exiled himself from, holding nothing but a court summons and a mountain of regret. I descended the final few steps of the grand staircase, the velvet of my gown brushing against the marble, feeling like a queen descending to greet her subjects. But the subject waiting for me at the bottom was a traitor. Caleb broke away from the shadows near the entrance and intercepted me before I could reach the dining hall. He stepped into my personal space, bringing with him the smell of stale scotch and desperation. He reached out, his fingers grazing my arm, and for a fleeting second, his face softened into the mask I used to love the charming, attentive husband who knew exactly what to say to disarm me. "Harper." "Wait," he murmured, pitching his voice low and intimate, trying to create a bubble of privacy in the crowded room. God, you look. You look incredible. I look at this place, at what you have done, and I finally get it. I know why you really did this. All this work, this house. You did it for us, didn't you? You wanted to prove to me that we could have it all. You did it to surprise me. The sheer audacity of his delusion was so immense that it actually made me laugh. It was not a polite social titter. It was a cold, sharp sound that cut through the murmur of the party like a knife. I pulled my arm away from his grasp and took a step back, ensuring that the nearby guests, including the mayor and his wife, could hear every word. For us, I repeated, my voice clear and ringing with amusement. No, Caleb, I did this for me. You called this house a garbage dump. You signed the deed. You walked away for $0. Remember, Caleb's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. The mask of the loving husband shattered instantly, replaced by the snarling entitlement of a man who feels the world owes him everything. I lived in this dust trap for months, he hissed, stepping closer, his voice rising. I suffered through the cold and the noise just as much as you did. I have rights. My lawyer says the contract is void because you hid the assets. I deserve half of this. Harper, I am not leaving here without what is mine. Actually, Mr. Sullivan, a sharp, steel-cut voice interrupted from behind him. What you deserve is a very long conversation with the district attorney. Renee materialized from the crowd like an avenging angel in a charcoal suit. She did not look at Caleb with fear. She looked at him with the clinical detachment of a butcher eyeing a side of beef. She thrust a thick, heavy manila folder into his chest, forcing him to grab it reflexively. That is not a settlement offer, Renee said, her voice projecting effortlessly. That is a countersuit. We have the forensic accounting on the $10,000 loan you took out 6 months ago, the one where you forged Harper's signature. That is a felony. Caleb, we have the bank records, the handwriting analysis, and the transfer logs sending that money straight to a slush fund for your fiancé. Caleb paled, his grip on the folder slackening. That is a misunderstanding. I was going to pay it back. And speaking of your fiancé, Renee continued, raising her voice just enough to draw the attention of the entire foyer. She pointed a manicured finger toward the vestibule where Bianca was trying to make herself invisible behind a potted palm. Our investigator ran a full check on Miss Bianca. She is not an heiress to a hotel chain. Her family disowned her 3 years ago. She filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 2 years ago. Oh, and Caleb. She is currently wanted in the state of Florida for $50,000 in credit card fraud and identity theft. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air right out of Caleb's lungs. He stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head to look at the woman he had destroyed our marriage for. Bianca was not looking at him with love or support. She was pressing herself against the wall, her face the color of ash, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. She didn't deny it. She didn't scream that it was a lie. She just looked terrified. Bianca Caleb choked out, his voice barely a whisper. Is that true? The trust fund? The hotels I told you I had cash flow problems? Bianca shrieked, her voice shrill and defensive. I told you I just needed a bridge loan. You said you were rich. You said you were an executive. The reality crashed down on Caleb with the force of a collapsing building. I watched the light die in his eyes. He realized in that split second that he had burned his life to the ground for a lie. He had abandoned a woman who was capable of building a multi-million-dollar empire from ruins, a woman who would have stood by him through anything, to chase a con artist who saw him as nothing more than her next mark. He had traded a diamond for a piece of broken glass, and the blood from that exchange was finally starting to soak his hands. The weight of the revelation regarding Bianca's fraud crushed Caleb instantly. But instead of anger, his survival instinct triggered a pathetic display of desperation. He lunged toward me, his sweaty hands grasping for my wrists, ignoring the gasps from the surrounding guests. His eyes, once so full of arrogance, were now swimming with tears of panic. "Harper, please, you have to listen to me," he begged, his voice cracking and high-pitched. I was bewitched. She manipulated me. She told me she was pregnant. She told me she had millions coming in trust funds I didn't know. Harper, I swear to God, I didn't know. He tried to pull me closer, his breath hitching in his chest. "It has always been you. Harper, you are my wife. We can fix this. Look at this house. We can live here. We can start over. I still love you." I never stopped. I looked down at his hands clutching my silk gown, feeling nothing but a profound, icy revulsion. It was the kind of pity one feels for a dying insect. I ripped my hands away from his grip with a sharp, decisive motion, stepping back so that there was a clear chasm of air between us. "Love?" I asked, my voice flat and void of emotion. "You don't love me, Caleb. You love the safety net I used to provide, and now you love the reflection of this gold leaf and marble." I raised my hand and pointed a steady finger at the magnificent Carrara marble fireplace behind me, the flames dancing in the grate. "Do you see that fireplace? Caleb," I asked loud enough for the room to hear, "I paid for that restoration with the money you were secretly saving to put a down payment on a Porsche for her. And that staircase, I swung my finger toward the sweeping oak steps. I sanded that by hand, hour after hour, while you were lying to me about being at a conference in Miami. Every inch of this house was built on the ashes of your betrayal. Marcus, my head of security, had seen enough." He signaled his team, and 2 large men in dark suits materialized on either side of Caleb and Bianca. They grabbed Caleb by the arms, their grip firm and unyielding. "Get your hands off me," Caleb screamed, thrashing against them, his dignity completely gone. "Harper, you cannot do this. This is marital property. This house is worth $2.5 million. I have rights. I am entitled to half." The guests parted like the Red Sea as the guards began to drag him toward the heavy oak front doors. He dug his heels into the expensive rug, fighting like a cornered animal. I signaled for Marcus to pause for just a second. I walked over to Caleb, the click of my heels echoing in the silenced room. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the fear radiating off him, and I lowered my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Actually, Caleb." "The new appraisal came in this afternoon," I whispered, savoring the words. "With the historical certification and the final finishes, it is valued at $3.2 million. And you signed a piece of paper declaring it was a pile of garbage. It is all mine. Goodbye, Caleb." I pulled back and nodded to Marcus. "No, no, Harper." Caleb howled as he was hauled backward. The heavy doors slammed shut with a final, resonant thud, cutting off his screams. Outside, in the biting Chicago cold, the scene played out to its bitter end. Through the security monitors in the hallway, I watched as the guards deposited them on the other side of the wrought iron gates. Caleb stood there, shivering in his thin suit, snow beginning to settle on his shoulders. He looked back at the house, at the warm, golden glow spilling from the windows, realizing he was locked out of paradise forever. Bianca, shivering violently in her inadequate coat, looked at the sobbing man beside her. The illusion was gone. There was no money, no status, just a broke fraudster crying in the snow. "You are pathetic." I watched her mouth the words on the screen. She didn't wait. She flagged down a passing taxi, jumped in, and slammed the door, leaving Caleb standing alone in the dark driveway. He fell to his knees in the slush, the cold seeping into his bones, while inside, the music swelled, and the party continued without him. The morning sun rose over Chicago, painting the world in blinding shades of white and gold. I stood on the master bedroom balcony, wrapping my cashmere robe tighter against the crisp air. I held a mug of steaming coffee in both hands, letting the warmth seep into my palms. The silence that blanketed the Sterling estate was absolute. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of loneliness that I had felt months ago. It was the peaceful, majestic silence of victory. My phone buzzed on the wrought iron table, breaking the stillness. It was Renee. "Good morning." "Winner." Her voice crackled with professional satisfaction. "I just got off the phone with Caleb's representation. They are withdrawing the motion to vacate the settlement. Completely." I took a sip of coffee, smiling against the rim of the mug. What changed his mind? "Two things," Renee explained. "First, he doesn't have the money to pay the retainer for a protracted trial. Second, once we mentioned the word felony regarding that forged loan application and the forensic trace to Bianca's accounts." He folded. "He is terrified of prison. Harper. He signed a final stipulation. He is gone. You are legally untouchable. Thank you. Renee, send me the bill. I will pay it with a smile." That wasn't the only news the morning brought. The real estate world is a small ecosystem, and gossip travels faster than light. By noon, I learned that Summit and Peak had terminated Caleb's contract effective immediately. Apparently, having your fiancé arrested for interstate fraud and causing a drunken scene at a high-profile networking gala is considered bad for business. Within 24 hours, Caleb had lost his wife, his home, his reputation, and his income. I walked through the house, my footsteps echoing on the white oak floors. Originally, the plan had been to flip the estate, sell it, take the $3.2 million, and move on. But as I stood in the sun-drenched conservatory, looking at the ferns unfurling in the warmth, I realized I couldn't let it go. This house wasn't just an asset. It was a part of me. I decided then and there. I would not sell. The Sterling estate would be my home, and the East Wing would become the headquarters for my new firm. But the house was too big for just one person. That afternoon, I drove to the city animal shelter. I walked past the rows of cages until I saw him a massive, goofy Great Dane mix with sad eyes who had been waiting for a home for 2 years. "Hey there, big guy," I whispered through the grate. "Do you want to live in a mansion?" I named him Sterling. When we got home, he skidded across the marble foyer, his tail wagging like a metronome, filling the empty space with life and clumsy joy. He was loyal, grateful, and he didn't care about my bank account, a significant upgrade from my ex-husband. A few days later, the doorbell rang. It was Julian. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo this time, just a sharp wool coat and a warm, genuine smile. He held a large roll of blueprints in one hand and a bouquet of purple heather in the other. "Heather," he said, handing me the flowers. "It symbolizes admiration and solitude." I thought it fit the mood. "Also, I have a warehouse in the West Loop that is screaming for a historical conversion. I was hoping you might be free for dinner to discuss it." "Strictly professional?" I asked, arching an eyebrow, though my heart did a little flip. "Mostly professional," he grinned. "But the wine will be excellent." We sat in my kitchen for hours, spreading the blueprints over the island, talking about structural integrity and future possibilities. It wasn't a whirlwind. Toxic romance. It was steady. It was respectful. It was real. 2 weeks later, the final touch was added. I stood by the front gates with a drill in my hand. I mounted a heavy, polished brass plaque onto the stone pillar. It read, "Sullivan Restoration and Design." As I tightened the last screw, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a blocked number. It rang once, twice, then hit the firewall of my block list. I didn't even check the voicemail. I knew who it was. Somewhere out there in the cold, Caleb was trying to reach a ghost. I stepped back to admire the sign, the sun catching the engraved letters. I realized then that I didn't hate Caleb anymore. Hate requires energy. I just felt nothing. The sweetest revenge wasn't seeing him suffer, though that was a nice bonus. It was living a life so vibrant, so full of color and success, that his existence became completely irrelevant to mine. I turned my back on the gate, whistled for Sterling, and walked back into my beautiful, warm home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you all and hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.